visionary with over 20 years of experience developing and studying leaders in a variety of environments, including the workplace, church, and university settings. Her doctoral research focused on the millennial generation and their view of leadership, and she really believes that this is a generation with unlimited value. We're excited to hear from her today, and I'd love you guys to join me in a welcome for Katherine.
All right, so how many of you are aware that there's a huge generational shift happening in the workforce? Okay, and it is affecting all of us in some way, shape, or form. And sometimes when this topic comes up, people actually have an emotional reaction. Okay, so we're going to start with millennials in the workforce, but I think what's actually happening is a lot deeper than that. Oh, I'm not on. Sorry, everyone. Commercial break. Thank you. So we're going to, whoa, now I'm on. We're going to start with two things we know to be true about organizations. And as we wrap up, we're going to talk about two things we know to be true about people and how we can navigate a way forward. So the first thing we know to be true about organizations is that they were created to achieve a purpose, right? They were created to actualize an intent. The second thing we know to be true about organizations is that they're made of people. People inherently carry a piece of the purpose within them. Now, that may be because they want to be compensated so that they can both live and play. It may be because they have a prestigious title and that gives them value. Or it could be because they're really bought into the mission and purpose of that organization. Many of the organizations that are around today began with the traditionalists, right? They founded them, they started them. Then the boomers entered. Boomers were large in number, and they shaped the values and beliefs of many of the organizations that exist today. Then Gen X entered the scene, much smaller in number, but mighty in force, decided to make some progress in workplace flexibility, help develop a lot of systems that are in organizations today, but overall, they complied with the way organizations were run. So what you have is organizations that have existed for more than half a century with a certain status quo, right? Okay. So what we know now, but what a lot of people don't want to talk about, is that change is happening, right? And as millennials have entered the workplace more and more each year, right? The way they view work, the way they think about life is very different than the way that the traditionalists, the boomers, and the Gen Xers have, right? So change is happening, and it's very dramatic in some ways, but it's also very natural. Often, the purpose of the organization stays the same, right? The way that it's being looked at is different. When change occurs, as humans, we can often take this very personally, right? Because this isn't just change, this is revolutionary change for a lot of people. Okay, so we can take it personally. And it can begin to threaten our own sense of purpose, our own beliefs, our own values about the workplace. So how do organizations move into this change and continue in their purpose to actualize their intent in this incredibly revolutionary space? So let's pause for a moment. When we think about generations, we often think about a 20-year span of time, right? Birth dates that happen every 20 years. That's when they shift. But generations are also formed based on the shared events and experiences that we all have while we're growing up. Okay? For example, traditionalists grew up during World War II, right? Boomers, you had the Vietnam War, the Civil Rights Movement, some hippies in there. Gen X, we watched the Columbia Space Shuttle blow up in front of our very eyes, and the first teacher perished in space. Okay, we all remember that moment. Millennials have been profoundly transformed and impacted by 9/11. Now shift a little bit and we think about food. Traditionalists Sunday dinner was going to happen, right? It's a big deal. Boomers ate TV dinners. Yes, millennials, people actually ate this and got excited about it, okay? This was our treat as a kid when my dad went out of town. We had TV dinners, all right? Gen Xers, we grew up on carryout overall, right? How many chicken McNuggets did I eat as a small child? Millennials are all about fresh, organic, home-delivered meals, right? So how do these things shape the generations in different ways? Oh, it's a little off, sorry. This is the framework we're using to think about generations. So this is the x-axis, and this is about our locus of control or our power center. Okay? If I have an internal locus of control, I believe that I can create change. I control the outcome. If I have an external locus of control, that means change happens to me. Okay? External factors control change. There we go. Okay. The y-axis is about our orientation. So if I'm oriented towards the collective, the goals of the group supersede the goals of the individual. If I'm oriented towards the individual, the goals of the individual take priority over the goals of the group, and self-sufficiency actually ensures the survival of the group. So when we look at the 4 quadrants, this is where the 4 generations land. So real quick, I'll run through a couple examples. Let's see. When we think about organizations, traditionalists believe they are for the people. Boomers believe they're by the people. Gen Xers believe organizations fail people. And millennials believe organizations are the people. When we think about communication, traditionalists are very direct. They want everybody to understand what they're saying. Boomers, there were a lot of them. They're all climbing that ladder. They're much more political in the way they typically communicate, right? They often start with the positive and they ease into the negative, right? Gen Xers want to be really aligned. They're very real in their communication, often very raw. Millennials are often more indirect in what they're saying. Sometimes it's kind of hard to figure out what exactly they mean. Now, if we focus in on the millennials just a little bit more, a recent survey by Zipcar found that 65% of millennials believe that losing their phone or their computer would be more detrimental to their daily life than losing their car. Okay, think about that. Pew Research recently found that the most common living situation for people between the ages of 18 to 34, which throws some Gen Zers in there, but mostly millennials, is what? Does anybody know? Most common living situation between 18 to 34.
Their parents.
Living at home with their parents. Okay? And I'm sure many of you have heard stories about millennials in the workplace. If you go online and you Google it, I mean, there's a zillion hits, right? I hear them all the time in what I do, obviously. And a very recent one happened downtown at an accounting firm. And they had this 27-year-old millennial that they were like, man, this guy has so much promise. We got to get him in front of the right people. We need to pour into him. And so they put him on this big project team with one of the senior partners. So it's the first meeting of the team. And as you can imagine, they're in a conference room downtown Chicago, overlooking the lake, big oak table, and they're all there except for the 27-year-old millennial. So his boss is like, what is going on? Where is this guy? So he calls him and he's like, Joe, where are you? Joe says, what do you mean, where am I? He's like, we have this meeting. Where are you? He said, well, it's a beautiful day. I figured I'd just call in from the lake. Right, that's the response, right? You're peeling everybody else off the ceiling, right? Because they're like, are you kidding me? But I promise you that millennial did not wake up that morning going, you know, I hope I do something that really makes my boss feel disrespected today. Or I hope when I go to the office that my boss wants to fire me today, right? That's not what he was thinking at all, right? So the issue is that we are incredibly divided. According to Gallup, millennial turnover, which is happening on average about every 3 years, sometimes a lot less, is costing the U.S. economy over $30 billion every year. So we've had these different experiences, and the way we think about work in the workplace is incredibly different. So what do? The natural thing for humans to do when they feel threatened, or when the status quo is in question, or when sheer numbers, right, millennials are the largest generation, when sheer numbers are just forcing change, is that we either defer to the new power, which is enabling, or we mitigate the new power base, which is isolation. Okay? So enabling is when we overemphasize the value of the individual and we prioritize the individual preferences over the organizational purpose. And this is all done in hopes of pleasing and appeasing employees into staying. Okay? So just because an employee from a certain generation wants something doesn't mean it's necessarily a good idea. For example, if your new millennial employee, all my stories are true, by the way, if your new millennial employee says that they need the first 5 Fridays off because they have to get to their college football games, you may not want to give them permission for that or set a precedence in your company for that, right? That might not be the best idea. Now, isolating looks like reducing the value of the individual by overemphasizing the value of the organization. So the individual is seen as a means to an end or a resource, okay? And they're not seen beyond their immediate use. So just because an organization doesn't understand the needs or wants of a generation doesn't make them all bad, right? For example, one of the biggest complaints I hear from millennial employees is, Katherine, they will not let me get up from my desk. They watch me all day long, and if I'm not at my desk, I get in trouble. I would say perhaps it's time to think about the fact that people may not work their best sitting behind a computer all day. And we need to be more creative and allow people some agency. So organizations need to avoid these two extremes, right? Neither one is good. So how do we start to engage, build bridges, and act in alignment with what the organizational purpose is? And organizations need to act out of integrity. So integrity looks like promoting we through expectations, leader behaviors, and lived values, right? Our values and our behaviors have to match. And this collaborative relationship builds up the individual within the context of the whole and draws them into a purpose beyond just feeling happy, right? Or beyond just pleasure. An organization works with employees to understand how their needs and wants work within the overall purpose of the organization. So for example, when it comes to a sense of belonging, there's not anyone in here who wouldn't say, I want to feel like I belong at my job, right? I want to be expected, or I want to be respected. I want to feel some connection with what I'm doing and who I'm working with. So enabling looks like leaders trying to make everyone happy. Isolating looks like employers, leaders, seeing their employees as a means to an end. Integrity looks like leaders seeing people as people, not as resources. And leaders becoming more curious about people. And rather than assuming the worst and jumping to conclusions and not being able to fathom how this 27-year-old millennial could possibly think that it's okay to call in from the lake, actually seeking to understand and engaging in meaningful conversation. Because having integrity, an organization with integrity, has the stability to explore and understand the vantage point of other people. They're not threatened by it. They're not worried about it. 2 things we know to be true about people. The first one is classifications. In this case, it's the different generations. Classifications necessarily divide us. The less we know about other people, the easier it is for us not to care about them and to make assumptions about them. But when we stay curious, okay, and we stay in relationship with each other, the more we know about each other, the more we care about each other, and we're able to engage in very meaningful ways. So if we turn this matrix on its side, and we think about what it looks like to connect each person in every generation to the overall purpose of the organization, and for the organization to maintain its integrity as it interacts with its people, this allows the organization to stay together while the people within the organization are given permission to be different. So how do we manage this? We have to be comfortable in our own skin. Integrity has to be something that's found within the individual, and it's also found within the organization. The second thing is we have to be curious about other people. We have to be able to engage with each other in meaningful ways. When I talk about this, some will say, well, Katherine, that sounds really easy. I would say this is not easy at all. In fact, I was talking to a major shipping company a few weeks ago, and they, literally 40% of their upper management is about to retire, and they have not recruited millennials. And so they are freaking out. They're having to change a ton of the way that they do many things. And he said the biggest issue we're having is generational conflict, and is putting the whole thing, it's giving everybody headaches, causing all kinds of chaos. So building and maintaining an organization with integrity is actually one of the most meaningful things we can do. And when people are drawn into the purpose, it makes a huge difference how we interact with each other. Then some people will say, well, if I do this, how does this combat all the millennials, keep them from leaving my organization? And I would say perhaps we're asking the wrong question. Okay? Why not turn this around and rather think about how we can create an organization with integrity and purpose that people want to be a part of, all the while leveraging the incredible strengths of the millennials, and then get to know each other one person at a time. So the challenge today is to build organizations that elevate everybody around purpose while maintaining curiosity about each other along the way. The choice of what we build is ours.